story. And then afterwards that I will go through my personal collection of ruby slippers and talk to you all about the various replicas that we have. And so I hope you guys really enjoy that. So stick around for that afterwards. So I'm going to move the camera to be closer to the table so that you guys get a better look at what we're about to watch. So because it's really hard, as I was saying, we're watching this from a VHS that I recorded when I was like 12. So alrighty, I'm gonna try to get as close as I can for you guys, okay? And we're gonna try figuring this out so it's not really like weird, but rather more entertaining than bizarre. So let's see. Oh. It's so different when you're setting up for these live shows, I'll tell you. You're just like, I'm going to do it this way. And then when we're actually doing the show, you're like, oh, that way would not work. So, yeah. I wish I had editing, you guys, but I don't. Can't edit live. So, we have to do this on a VHS, which is fine. Not my preferred method. I'm going to be trying to find a way to transfer this onto DVD eventually. And then if you guys want a copy, just write me. I won't charge people because that's wrong. You can't do that. But I will definitely, let's see if I can, no, that's not going to work. So yeah, let's see. Okay, I'm going to put this here. And again, like I said, I apologize that it's like janky like this, that we have to watch this. But again, they just never re-aired this ever. And like, it's not online anywhere. And I don't have the equipment to transfer it online for you guys. So I have to do it this way. I'm sorry. Forgive me. See, back in the day, kids, that's how we did things. That's how we started stuff. Okay, let's see if I can...
There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Ever since Judy Garland uttered those immortal words in MGM's 1939 production of The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's ruby slippers have become the ultimate cinematic icon.
If she clicked the heels 3 times, anything could happen, like magic.
There was nothing like The Wizard of Oz. It touched our hearts. We love these people. We love these stars. And we want to keep them close.
But the whereabouts of the actual ruby slippers, the pairs that were used in the making of the film, has become a cinematic whodunit. A bizarre mystery that takes one into the dark underbelly of Hollywood, where treasured pieces of memorabilia are bought, sold, and jealously guarded.
He destroyed some of the pairs. He burned them, simply because he just felt that would increase the value of the ones that were left.
It is a story with more twists and turns than the Yellow Brick Road.
He had a network of people who were in the studio system, and he would give them a stipend if they were able to liberate a movie prop and bring it to him.
In the next hour, we'll follow the remarkable trail of the ruby slippers, from the beginning, when the shoes adorned the feet of 16-year-old Judy Garland.
The shoes, in their time, probably cost $12, $13 to make.
To the world of black market memorabilia collectors, whose obsessive drive to own the slippers rivaled that of the Wicked Witch of the West.
I've been wrong. They had taken the ruby slippers.
We'll see priceless costumes left to rot in dank studio warehouses, and meet a Hollywood Robin Hood, who absconded with everything from Ginger Rogers' beaded gowns.
It wasn't fetish in the sense of wanting to be in a woman's dress. It was the dress from Fall of the Fleet.
The little Dorothy's shoes.
A ray of sunlight came streaming through these old rotted boards and hit a sequin.
He didn't have a right to take them. He didn't.
And finally, the ruby slippers will transport us to the rarefied halls of Christie's auction house, where we'll have front row seats at one of the most fiercely contested bidding wars.
I approached that glass case and got close to those ruby slippers. Shivers went up and down my back. I almost couldn't control myself.
This is the story of lost treasure, shattered dreams, and the power of movie magic. This is the story of the trail of the ruby slippers. The E! True Hollywood Story.
Her life's ambition was to be a star.
Oh, it's called The Trail of
The
the
year
Ruby
was
Slippers.
1938. America had been mired in the Great Depression for nearly a decade when MGM studio chief Louis B. Mayer launched production on The Wizard of Oz. The film was budgeted to be MGM's most expensive movie to date. The dictatorial Mayer involved himself in everything, from choosing the star, Judy Garland, to choosing Judy's shoes. Ruby Slipper owner Michael Shaw.
In the book, in H.L. Romm's Wizard of Oz, they're silver slippers. When Louis B. Mayer read the script, he says, I don't want my star wearing a pair of black and white shoes in a Technicolor movie.
Believing red would contrast nicely with the yellow brick road, screenwriter Noel Langley crossed out silver shoes and replaced them with ruby slippers. The task of designing the shoes went to Hollywood's premier costumer, a man so renowned in the industry that his screen credit read simply, Gowns by Adrian. Adrian whipped up freehand sketches on the set, conjuring up hundreds of breathtaking ensembles for the citizens of Oz. Moroccan bellhop outfits for the Flying Monkeys, science fiction fantasy suits for the Munchkins, ornate czarist overcoats for the Witches' Guards. The ruby slippers were something of an afterthought. Author Rhys Thomas.
They were intricately beaded and intricately designed, but nonetheless not valuable. I think the shoes, in their time, probably cost $12, $13 to make.
Once the prototype of the shoes was approved, the wardrobe supervisor made backups, a standard practice on movie sets.
You're spending thousands of dollars a day on production, and a shoe breaks a heel. You can't stop down for the rest of the day while the shoe goes out to the shoemaker.
No records were kept about exactly how many pairs of shoes were made. Garland's daughter, Lorna Luft.
My mother had to have had 2 or 3. Then she had a stunt double. Then there were ones they did for still shots. Then there were a pair that were just on the feet of the Wicked Witch that rolled, her feet rolled under the house. So there were quite a number of pairs.
As the grueling 6-month shoot drew to a close, Judy Garland had no desire for keepsakes from the set. Oz expert John Fricke.
Judy Garland made $9,600 for her work in The Wizard of Oz. Not a week, period. I think if she really wanted a pair of ruby slippers in 1939, they would have said, for sure, honey, take them home. But nobody knew, nobody cared.
When production of The Wizard of Oz wrapped in 1939, most of the slippers went into storage, a warehouse on the MGM backlot known as Ladies' Character Wardrobe. The ruby slippers were deposited in the 3rd floor loft of the barn-like building.
The women that worked in the wardrobe department were very hesitant to go up there because it was a very rickety stairway, plus the fact that they knew that there weren't any costumes up there that they could use again because they had been so recognizable.
Only one set of shoes was known to have escaped this lonely fate. MGM offered a pair of ruby slippers as a prize in a nationwide contest to name the 10 best films of 1939, a year that included such timeless classics as Pygmalion and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In Memphis, Tennessee, a local teacher sponsored the contest. Former student Roberta Bowney.
The teacher, Miss Josephine Ellsworth, was then a member of the Better Films Council. These people went to the movies and reviewed them.
Miss Josephine organized the contest through her Photoplay Film Club, a group of teens who met after school to talk about movies. Out of the thousands of nationwide entries, the club produced 2 winners, 16-year-old Roberta Jeffries and 17-year-old Will Bowden.
The teacher presented me with the ruby slippers of Oz, and all she said was they were worn by Judy Garland. And a classmate of mine received a gavel that Harry Carey used in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Roberta's win was duly noted in the local papers, and she proudly displayed her shoes to friends and family. But World War II was on the horizon, and Jeffrey's attention soon turned to more important matters. Roberta's ruby slippers were packed away in a simple pasteboard shoebox, while in Los Angeles, the other slippers gathered dust in the MGM warehouse. Coming up, a fox is given keys to the costume house.
Kent did say, oh, I'm taking these to the cleaners. Well, I'll tell you who he was taking to the cleaners was not the clothes.
And later,
There are people that don't just love collecting on a hobby, they become obsessed with it. That to me is a sickness.
Where can you find exotic rituals,
Look, white t-shirt contest, shopping contest.
sexy swimwear,
Ooh!
optional.
So there's commercials from back when I was a kid. So from the 90s, I don't know, like late 90s. I don't know if you guys will watch that, or if I should just like
And
talk
I'm
through
Julia,
that.
and we're bringing you the very latest on the Academy
So
Awards
like
and everything.
that's interesting. I guess I'll just talk through the commercials. There's nothing Oz about the commercials. But yeah, I absolutely love this episode of True Hollywood Stories. Again, like I said, this only aired once, and as far as my knowledge is, some people say it aired again, like at really early hours in the morning, which to me doesn't even count because like who was watching that? But like yeah, this only aired once to my knowledge during a prime time viewing, and yeah, it's really informative. It is basically like the book, The Ruby Slippers of Oz, which we'll talk about later, by Rhys Thomas that I have. And I will pull that out later after this that we can take a look at. But once this commercial's over, we'll hop right back onto this. So here we go. Okay, let's see. Oh, how fun were these commercials back then? Oh, Sam says, by the way, you can't replicate them for $13 now. No, you can't. It's not the 1930s, as much as we wish it was. I'm like trying to give you guys a better like view on this. Let's see if I can do this. I don't want to like, such an awkward thing trying to film a screen with a phone. Oh, right. This is so much better. If I could just get it on this level. And you guys can see the ring light in it. Let's see. Hold on. Yeah, we got some minute here. We got a minute here. I don't want to like fast forward through the commercials. Let's see. This gives me time, you guys, to like actually mess with it and get you a better angle to view this. Hopefully you guys don't fall off the chair. Oh, this might work out better for you guys. Look at that. There we go. It's back.
During production of The Wizard of Oz in 1939, the ruby slippers were considered just another wardrobe item. Unless a costume could be reused, the studio had no interest in it. Then in the mid-1960s, a visionary Hollywood costumer rewrote the rules to the game.
Even if Kent knew or thought he was stealing, I think he felt he was answering a higher calling.
Hollywood costumer Kent Warner was born in New York City in 1943. In a 1977 interview with the LA Times, Kent described his childhood as dull and unhappy. Warner recalled seeking refuge from a cruel, domineering grandfather by accompanying his grandmother on jaunts to the movies. In the grand movie palaces of Midtown Manhattan, young Kent lost himself in fantasies about Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, and other denizens of Hollywood's golden age. Fantasies that continued long after the credit roll. Costume designer Ken Maley.
He would go to a friend of his mother's and dress up in old clothes from the attic and stuff like that. Kent was not a cross-dresser. He wasn't a drag queen. But he was truly awed by film and film history.
Enamored with all things Hollywood, 23-year-old Kent moved to Los Angeles in 1963 and took a job at Berman's Costume House. Warner's first assignment was to inventory Berman's latest acquisition, the entire wardrobe department of the defunct RKO Studios. Author, Rhys Thomas.
The owner of Berman's, all he really wanted were reusable items. He wanted his guys to go in there, find the clothes that could be rented out again. When Kent Warner went in there, he found true Hollywood treasures.
But Kent's delight soon turned to horror. Warner discovered that Hollywood held little or no regard for the film history he held so dear.
In some cases, a Ginger Rogers gown would never be reusable, and so the instructions were throw it away. But he couldn't stand to see items thrown away. A lot of the costumes were also being used as rags in the commissary at RKO. That just broke his heart.
Day in and day out, Kent combed through wardrobe racks cataloging articles for Berman. All the while, Kent made it his mission to rescue Star Wardrobe. Warner used his encyclopedic knowledge of classic film to determine which costumes had historical value. Those articles were discreetly placed in garment bags near the exit door.
Kent did say, "Oh, I'm taking these to the cleaners." Well, I'll tell you who he was taking to the cleaners was not the clothes.
Warner felt he was saving items for posterity and called his actions liberations. But Kent's altruism was clouded by his conduct. Warner and his living lover, fellow costumer Ron Wynn, began trafficking in collectibles, selling items out of the trunks of their cars.
What they were doing was creating an underworld marketplace for Hollywood memorabilia at a time when it didn't exist.
He didn't do it just for the money's sake. The real love and the drive, and I think devotion, was to the things and to the history of the things.
The objectives of 32-year-old Ron were less complex.
Ron Wynn's motive was really money. Ron really fell into the drug culture of the late 60s. He had an alcohol history. That became detrimental to his relationship with Kent. In
1969, Kent moved out on his own. Collector Michael Shaw.
We used to gather over here, and I would show movies. I'd rent classic films, and I'd show them on, my movie projector.
Kent enjoyed the parties as a chance to model his fabulous collection of Star Wardrobe. Kent would disappear into the changing room.
Next thing you knew, he'd come out.
Kent would disappear into the changing room.
Next thing you knew, he'd come out with the dress. Well, she was a very small person, Ginger Rogers, and I think it was a testament to his own fitness and figure that he could even get into it.
Kent adored the elegant sirens of Hollywood's golden age, but he held a special place in his heart for Wizard of Oz star Judy Garland. When Judy died in 1969, Kent, along with countless devoted fans, was devastated.
She became almost an icon, especially in the gay community, mainly because so many people knew of her childhood, her unhappy childhood, the way she had been used, with that. And, of course, Herb Feid with that. And, of course, her great talent.
MGM, the studio that made Garland famous, was also at death's door. Las Vegas financier Kirk Kerkorian purchased MGM and began selling off the studio's assets. The land went a liquidator. Props and wardrobe went to the David Weiss Company, a liquidator. When Kent heard about a job preparing MGM's wardrobe department for auction, he volunteered to work for free. Warner knew that somewhere in the acres and acres of storage space, amid hundreds of thousands of props and costumes representing 50 years of the greatest films in history, lay the Holy Grail. Coming up, Kent Warner and the Temple of Doom.
A ray of sunlight came streaming through these old rotted boards and hit a sequin and made it sparkle.
Weeknights on E! At 6:30, Steve Komenko and Jules Asner deliver E! News Daily. Then at 7, Emmy's on the scene with Fashion Emergency.
Kent Warner and the Temple of Doom.
The search is on with Carol Drone.
Kind of funny. Yeah, so as you guys heard, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Like, they sat in a barn in a back lot for a really long time. Millions of dollars, what we consider millions of dollars worth of collectibles nowadays, just sitting in a barn, rotting. And Mr. Kent Warner was the lucky one to go back there and find them. How crazy. Can you imagine? Like I said, tonight's documentary is more or less like a live version of the book, The Ruby Slippers of Oz by Rhys Thomas. So check that out. Rhys Thomas is in this documentary. He's the guy who's telling the story. He wrote a book, and that book is amazing, and it is called The Ruby Slippers of Oz, and you need to get this book. You have to have this book. It's amazing. So, yeah. I will show that later after this. We'll go into that. But like again, I'm just sitting here like a kid in a candy store, like listening to this. I love this. I said like the ruby slippers are my favorite subject of the Wizard of Oz, and I find the story fascinating. How something like that was just discarded and left into a barn. So. Let's see. Anita says, I have that exact Panasonic TV VCR. Right? Oh my God. Isn't that funny? Like, hello 90s, like throwback to the 90s. I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah. Come on, 90s. Like, I love it. Sam told me about that book. Yes, Anita, you need to get that book. Sam is right. It is the Ruby Slipper Bible. It really is. It really is. It tells the story. It's like the greatest story ever told. I love it. I absolutely love it. So, yeah. There's a Nasonex commercial from. It's just weird. Yeah, like Nasonex. You guys remember that? I'm sure they probably outlawed that for something probably horrible it did to its people. Maybe it's not. Maybe not. My apologies to Nasonex. If not, but if I'm right, then shame on you. Anyway, the 90s, and even now we still have like these drug commercials on TV. So weird. We're the only country that allows that. I think that's so weird. But yeah. Oh, so let's see. Oh, here we go.
Throughout the 1960s, film costumer Kent Warner supplied an underground memorabilia market with loot from his costuming jobs. In 1970, MGM Studios decided to liquidate a half-century of extraordinary props and costumes, among them the Ruby Slippers. Kent saw the opportunity for the greatest score of them all.
Kent was probably the only person who had the patience, the discipline, the knowledge, and the passion to go through the MGM costume inventory. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of items.
David Weiss, the owner of the David Weiss Auction Company, thought Kent was a godsend. Never suspecting a hidden agenda, Weiss marveled at Kent's vast knowledge of film history, elaborate costume displays, and journeyman work ethic, all provided gratis. Collector Michael Shaw.
Kent was literally given carte blanche from the David Weiss Auction Company for the entire disposition of the costumes. They didn't know from costumes. They had been a company that had auctioned, I think, farm implements.
The auction, set for May of 1970, would be the largest studio closeout sale in history, the end of an era. Judy Garland's daughter, Lorna Luft.
Young people out there don't understand what MGM was, how big it was, that they did over 3,500 makeups an hour, that their phone bill was almost the same as New York City, that they put a movie a week into theaters.
Longtime MGM staffers watched in horror as their ship went down in flames. Film historian Mark Wanamaker worked as a research consultant at MGM.
It was the most sad and distressing kind of feel that all this wonderful treasure would be pulled out, and what would be their fate? They would show it to their boss, and the boss would say, well, that doesn't look auctionable. And then they would dump it.
Employees frantically tried to salvage items from the sinking monolith.
From grips to painters to office workers who were at the MGM lot for years tried to pick things out of the trash.
In a perverse catch-22, the MGM legal department ordered studio security to thwart rescue efforts.
The studio police would stop them and saying, you're not allowed to steal this or take this. This is theft. But then they would say, well, it's being thrown away.
Cool during the chaos, operating undercover but with official sanction, was Kent Warner. Friend and colleague, Ken Maley.
I suspect he had more than one shopping list in mind. There was the list for the auction, there was the list for his collectors, there was the list for his own collection. What can I find?
Kent wasn't just fishing in the dark. Warner knew his treasure lay somewhere within the 7 hangar-sized warehouses. And then one afternoon, he hit the mother lode.
He goes up one of these rickety ladders up into not a crawl space, but sort of a loft area, and begins hunting around and starts finding Wizard of Oz items.
And the more he searches, the more he finds. The story he liked to tell was that a ray of sunlight came streaming through these old rotted boards and hit a sequin and made it sparkle.
The jeweled sparkle of the ruby slippers. Dorothy's shoes, the shoes that made Judy Garland a star. Kent was over the rainbow. And Warner did not just discover a single pair of slippers, but multiple pairs of all the various backups. Kent had a vested interest in keeping the precise number of shoes a secret. Ostensibly, Warner was in the direct employ of the David Weiss Company, and all auctionable items were to be liquidated.
There was someone in a relatively functional position at the studio who happened to be with him that day, and that a pair went to that person as a bribe to keep quiet about how many pairs there were. He told me he destroyed some of the pairs. He burned them, simply because he just felt that would increase the value of the ones that were left.
He didn't have a right to take them. He didn't.
No one has ever come forward claiming they were with Kent the day he found the slippers, and no one has admitted witnessing Warner destroying any shoes. But the lineage of 3 sets of slippers, all used in the film, is firmly established. Kent presented one pair, the shoes in the worst condition, to the auctioneer.
Insteps were broken and sequins were missing. He brought them to David Weiss, and David Weiss didn't know what they were. But David, these are the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. And he said, well, do you think we can get anything for them?
Kent sold the second pair to collector Michael Shaw for $2,500.
Came to the door, he put them on the table, and God, I couldn't talk.
Warner kept the third pair, which were in pristine shape, for himself. On May 2nd, 1970, the MGM auction opened. Stage 27 at the studio was set up with a podium, and Kent Warner, a whiz at making costumes rustle, swirl, and come to life, was one of the presenters. In 1970, the memorabilia market was in its infancy, but the enormity of the sale attracted bidders from around the world. Actress Debbie Reynolds.
I was there every day, bidding my money away, all my savings went, because I really broke my heart that all the movie star memorabilia was just going up for auction for Halloween costumes and for people that weren't buying it for a specific reason.
Debbie's dream was to open a museum of Hollywood memorabilia with Michael Shaw as curator. When the ruby slippers were placed on the auction block, Reynolds was conspicuous in her silence.
I felt that they were going too high for one item, and I was buying multiple sets.
When the final gavel fell, Dorothy's shoes sold for $15,000 to an anonymous Southern California millionaire.
People were bewildered at the price. They thought this was too much.
Coming up, Robin Hood's band of merry men meet the Burbank police.
Kent's response to that was, if you bring me into this, I'll kill you.
The world's biggest stars, Hollywood's biggest night, and entertainment's biggest network has it covered live.
So now we get into the nitty gritty. So police getting involved. Ooh, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like, yeah. So that got down to like being really like nuts. He had multiple pairs and people knew about this, and this pair had just sold for a record-breaking amount at auction through David Weiss, and then as Michael Shaw, as you heard, paid $2,500. Let's all take a second and really divulge that inside. $2,500. $2,500 for a pair of real ruby slippers. We pay that now for a pair of replicas. For replicas. We pay that for replicas now, okay? Woo! Okay. Let's take that back. $2,500. $2,500 for a pair of real ruby slippers from the film that Judy wore, walked around in. Yeah, $2,500. $2,500. Sorry, I'll stop. Ooh, okay, anyway. So, yes, that's what we pay now for replicas, and even higher than that. So Western Costume sold their replicas in 1989 for $5,000 a pair. For pair replicas. More than what Michael Shaw paid for a pair of real ruby slippers in the 70s. Crazy. Inflation is a biatch. So. Talk about the deal of a lifetime. Really think about that. That's insane. And back in the 70s, $2,500 was like quite a bit of money to make on a pair of shoes. So, like, damn for them back then. I'm sorry about the commercials, you guys. As I said, like, this is a VHS. Back when I was a child, you could record things off TV. We didn't have the TiVo. You could pop a VHS in and just hit record. And bibbidi bobbidi boo, you would have your TV show and all of its lovely commercials. Look at this, like Clairol hair commercials. Now we got Brad Mondo on TV, on the internet rather, like telling people not to do that to their hair. So kind of fun. Oh, how fun. Oh, here we go. Oh, maybe not. Hollywood Story. You know, like, honestly, you guys, I really wish they'd put all of these on DVD. Like, seriously. It's such a great series.
In 1970, MGM auctioned off 50 years of Hollywood's most treasured icons, including an item that sparked a movie memorabilia feeding frenzy, the Ruby Slippers.
I would refer to them as the Mona Lisa, Sistine Chapel.
30 years earlier, in 1940, Roberta Jeffries, now Roberta Bauman, won a pair of ruby slippers in a nationwide film contest. For decades, Roberta told local school children that her shoes were the only pair. The news of the auctioned slippers astonished the Memphis housewife, and she wrote MGM, hoping to learn more.
I did not get a reply as to whether my shoes were the real shoes that Judy Garland wore.
On May 21st, 1970, a Memphis newspaper reported Roberta's story. Now, it was the anonymous collector's turn to be shocked. Author Rhys Thomas.
He was then assured by the auctioneer that those were the only pair, and led to believe, maybe, by the auctioneer, that Roberta Bauman's pair were fakes.
Nevertheless, the anonymous collector packed up his ruby slippers and shipped them to the nation's capital.
They were donated to the Smithsonian after the owner realized that he did not have the only pair. So he figured, well, at least he'd get a good tax break.
Dorothy's shoes quickly became one of the most popular items at the American History Museum. Former Munchkin, Jerry Merritt.
I didn't know these things were so important that they're going to be put in the Smithsonian Institute, man. That's the ultimate in American history.
Despite the commotion about multiple pairs of slippers, the trade in black market memorabilia continued unabated. Historian Mark Wanamaker.
There were certain people, different types, that went out there looking for objects to make money with.
Costumer Kent Warner was no longer the only game in town. By 1973, John LeBold, a member of Kent's inner circle, had replaced Michael Shaw as the curator of Debbie Reynolds' proposed Museum of Hollywood History. 3 years after the 1970 auction, Debbie's dream still hadn't reached fruition. Reynolds petitioned film studios to allow LeBold access to their wardrobe departments in order to catalog historical items.
She would be doing them a favor by doing the cataloging, and then she would offer to buy some of the things for the museum.
At a salary of $180 a week, John LeBold spent 6 months at Warner Brothers going through every dark and dreary wardrobe warehouse, examining thousands of costumes in an attempt to determine their star value. But, in the end, the studio decided to pull the plug on LeBold's efforts. Adding insult to injury, Jack Delaney, director of wardrobe at Warner, began to smell a rat.
Head of the costume department at Warner Brothers, sometime later, perceived what he thought was missing items.
At first, no one confronted John LeBold about the discrepancies. But in 1979, 6 years after completing the cataloging job, LeBold was spotted renting out items that were reported missing by Warner Brothers. Unbeknownst to Debbie Reynolds, LeBold was running a costume rental business out of Reynolds Burbank Dance Studio. Prosecuting attorney Myra Riddell.
Now, this led to an undercover operation in which Detective Kite went onto the facility, and the object was to enter into a rental contract. And actually, 10 items were rented. And when they took these rental items back, Warner Brothers identified all of them as being their property.
On December 27, 1979, Detective Robert Kite paid LeBold a second visit. 667 star costumes were confiscated, all with Warner Brothers tags.
That was receiving stolen property, and it has a state prison term upon conviction of 16 months, 2 years, or 3 years.
Debbie Reynolds had no knowledge of LeBold's activities. Actress Debbie Reynolds.
It's kind of sad when you have someone that you hire to be your curator, and then the curator starts collecting your collectibles. It's devastating.
Due to court congestion, the case against John LeBold did not go to trial until February 5, 1981. LeBold's attorney attempted to show Warner Brothers could not prove ownership simply because an item was labeled with a studio tag.
The story was that most of these things were purchased through swap meets and secondhand stores, but we're talking about 667 costumes with the names of Clark Gable sewn into them.
Terrified of going to prison, LeBold looked to his friends for help.
And one of the people he called as a character witness and to help his defense was Kent Warner. Kent's response to that was, if you bring me into this, I'll kill you.
On March 25, 1981, the trial came to a close. 8 out of 12 jurors voted for conviction, but the case ended with a hung jury. The next day, the court declared a mistrial, and LeBold was released. Of the 667 items that were seized, only 26 items were returned to LeBold, including Sally Field's flying nun habit. LeBold continued collecting and became a major player in the memorabilia market. Although Kent Warner's name didn't come up in the trial, Warner was distressed that a spotlight was focused on his secret world of costume liberation.
When Warner Brothers went after John LeBold, it signaled to everyone that the jig was up.
Not only was Kent feeling pressure from the law, he was also suffering from chronic flu and other ailments. Although he didn't know it at the time, Kent was one of the first men in Los Angeles to contract AIDS.
His insurance coverage wasn't going to take care of it. So I think he decided it was time to sell the shoes.
In October of 1981, Kent consigned his pair of slippers to Christie's auction house in New York City. Just 10 years after Kent Warner rescued the ruby slippers from obscurity, or worse, he was now ready to unload them to the highest bidder. Coming up, shoe fraud.
Ted Smith is maybe the most pathetic character in the entire story. He was a real operator.
A madman and a mother-to-be, connected by a crime
The
that
tea
shocked
is
the
hot
city.
on these ruby slippers. Red hot. Hotter than they glow
Sharon
red.
Tate was the Manson
Like,
family's most
oh, here,
famous
I'll turn
victim.
this down. Oh, there was a documentary about the Sharon Tate murders. Ooh. I don't know about you guys, but I find that stuff fascinating. I love old Hollywood stories. Anything, like, outside of Wizard of Oz. I mean, like, no, Hollywood's just fascinating, right? Like, jeez, to go through the garage sale of Hollywood, like, that's what Kent Warner essentially did. He went through, like, the garage sale of old Hollywood and got to see all of the things we wish we could have seen, and, you know, maybe just been like, whoop, and put in our pocket and just walk away. I know, isn't this a scandal, Deborah? Like, oh my God, Scandal Central. Like, I told you I was spilling the tea tonight. Like, yeah, like, nobody, you don't think that when you look at the ruby slippers in the Smithsonian, you don't know that story. They don't tell you, like, oh, the guy who bought these thought, oh, I'm getting the only ones, that's why I'm going to pay all this money. And then after he bought them, Roberta Bauman came out and was like, I got a pair of ruby slippers myself. And then they were like, oh, well, oh, she lying. No, she's not lying. Like, She lives in Tennessee. She got them when she was younger in a contest from MGM. Like, she actually has them. And see, that proved to a long generation of people that there were many, like, multiples made of shoes and of things like that in a movie. Like, come on, duh. Like, if a shoe breaks a heel, you're not going to, like, stop production of a multi-million-dollar film because your main star doesn't have a pair of shoes. Like, come on. It makes sense when you think about it. And like, that's the thing about the ruby slippers. And when people ask me about them and stuff, it's like, think of them not as like this magical item that we're led to think that they are. They're a prop in the movie. And so like, think in our world sense, and like, you know, don't fanboy or fangirl over them, don't have a fandom over them, but just look at them as what they actually are and how they were treated back in the 30s. A pair of shoes for a movie. And like they were thrown in a barn, and it's crazy. So Kelly says, let's see, Kelly Pippin writes, but if Kent didn't do this, think of how many other costumes would have been destroyed. That's true. That's so true. He truly saved like Hollywood history. Ooh, it's coming back. It's coming back. Yay.
Throughout the 1960s and early 70s, memorabilia fanatic Kent Warner pilfered the studios with impunity. On October 12, 1981, in need of money and suffering from a mysterious disease, Kent put his most treasured possession on the auction block.
He loved those shoes so much. I would have thought that only something really serious would ever cause him to sell them.
Warner was hopeful when he consigned his shoes to Christie's auction house in New York City. Kent figured the ruby slippers would fetch at least $20,000. For Kent Warner, Dorothy's slippers lost their magic. But the underground memorabilia market he spawned continued to grow. In San Francisco, a 41-year-old novelty store owner named Ted Smith followed any news of the ruby slippers with rapt attention. A lifelong Oz freak, Smith's Humpty Dumpty and Sons curio shop featured everything from Munchkin outfits to the witch's hat worn by Margaret Hamilton. But Ted didn't have what he desired most of all. On January 12, 1982, Smith contacted longtime slipper owner Roberta Bauman at her Memphis home.
He said he was interested in my shoes. Could I please give the size, the measurements, and some information about my ruby slippers? And I sent him several copies of my correspondence and drew a little pattern of my shoe.
After receiving Roberta's photos and diagrams, the shop owner paid an unsuspecting craftsman $250 to duplicate the shoes. But for true slipper aficionados, Smith's forgery was pathetic.
I knew immediately that they were not even closely related. They weren't the deep, color, blood sort of red color that was necessary for lighting.
But Smith had a master plan. On October 17, 1984, he reported the slippers stolen to San Francisco police in order to file an insurance claim.
The San Francisco Police Department investigated the case thoroughly and determined that it was a fraud.
Realizing the police were onto him, Ted Smith closed up shop and disappeared from the memorabilia world forever.
The only thing that saved Ted Smith from prison was the fact that he did not file that insurance claim.
Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Kent Warner continued to wage his private battle against AIDS. Although weak and losing his eyesight, Warner never gave up his passion for costumes. In 1982, 39-year-old Warner was named head of wardrobe for the TV series The A-Team, but his health continued to deteriorate. Fellow costumer Sheila Mason.
One day he sat and he says, "Oh," he was sitting with his hand in his head, and I leaned over and I said, "Kent, why don't you go home?" And with as much strength as he could, he gave me the biggest hug that anybody could get with the strength, and I can still feel his little bony arms around me.
5 days later, on April 25th, 1984, Kent Warner died at UCLA Medical Center from septic shock and complications due to the AIDS virus.
I will be grateful to him on my dying day for what he made available for me. He was a wonderful, generous, fun ditz. I mean, he was just the greatest guy in the world.
Tragically, Kent took the secrets of the ruby slippers to his grave. No one will ever know how many pairs of slippers Warner discovered that day on the MGM lot in 1970. But the Hollywood memorabilia market Kent created was about to explode. Roberta Bauman decided to sell her pair of Dorothy's shoes.
I was going to turn 65 years old. And when you start aging like that, you don't know how long you're going to be here.
A set of ruby slippers had been in Roberta Bauman's loving care for 48 years. For decades, Roberta trotted them out whenever The Wizard of Oz was on TV and displayed them at local children's libraries in Memphis. With retirement looming, Roberta called upon Christie's to help her find the slippers a new home. Just 7 years after Kent Warner's shoes sold for a disappointing $12,000, Hollywood collectibles were now red hot. Curators from Planet Hollywood and the Hard Rock Cafe were buying up collectibles to decorate their restaurants. What's more, The Wizard of Oz was about to celebrate its 50th anniversary. Prospective buyer Anthony Landini made the pilgrimage from his home in Florida to view the slippers before they hit the auction block.
I stepped real close and I looked at them and I started to get a shiver throughout my whole body. I knew that I had to have them.
On June 21st, 1988, more than 500 people jammed into Christie's to see who would go home with the ruby slippers.
There was a very tense hush when the shoes were brought up for sale. So I opened the shoes as an auctioneer at $10. It just shocked people.
I did not pick up my paddle till it reached $75,000.
Coming up, the Ruby Slipper Retirement Fund.
Well, I was kind of numb.
Weeknights on E! At 6:30, Steve Komenko and
She was kind of numb. That's funny. Yeah, there's a lot of money. $2,500. Still stuck on that. Oh my god. So, yes, to answer Brenda's question, I saw she asked if I had a pair of silver shoes. So let's take this time while during commercial to answer some questions. So, yes, I do have a pair of silver slippers. As you may know, in Baum's original writings of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Dorothy wore silver shoes, not ruby. And I do have a pair of silver shoes. The ones seen here were worn in the show Once Upon a Time, ABC's Once Upon a Time, and they were worn by Rebecca Mader. And so these, she was a Wicked Witch. She was the Wicked Witch in the show. And yeah, these were the shoes that she wore as the Wicked Witch. And also, fun fact, the costume behind me right here is the costume from that show as well, worn by their Dorothy. I also have that in my collection, so there's that as well. So there you go. Fun little fact for those who didn't know and were just tuning in. Dorothy's shoes are silver in the book, not ruby. That was an MGM creation in order to really take advantage of the Technicolor process that they were going to feature. But yes, in ABC's Once Upon a Time TV series, they featured silver shoes on their Dorothy. And these are them. Ooh, I hear Dirty Dancing. Oh my god. Look, old Sandals commercial. Come on. When I was a kid, I used to ask my mom, I was like, what is this place? My mom was like, Now I'm older and I know what it was for. It's like where old people go to rekindle their marriage. Is this place even a thing, like, anymore? Like, is it? Like, what happened to Sandals? Like, oh my god, that's so weird. Oh my god. Is that Blanche Devereaux?
Call your travel agent or 1-800-SANDALS.
Nassau, Bahamas. Oh, it's back. Here we go.
In 1938, Roberta Bauman's prized ruby slippers were manufactured for less than $20. 50 years later, the now legendary shoes were put on the auction block. Bids had passed the $100,000 mark and continued to climb.
Each time the gavel went down, people were just breathless.
At high noon on June 21st, 1988, Christie's auction house was packed with prospective buyers. Following an orgy of bidding, the competition was narrowed down to 3 people. Anthony Landini was one of the remaining bidders.
There's myself, another gentleman in the front row, and someone on the telephone. Well, between the gentleman in the front row and myself, we wore down the bidding.
When the shoes skyrocketed past $145,000, the telephone buyer reluctantly withdrew.
Now it was just the 2 of us.
145.
And at that time, I heard my son's voice in the back of my head say, "Bring him home, Pop."
The savage bidding war lasted just under 3 minutes from beginning to end. When it was over, Anthony Landini, father of 4, grandfather of 12, and lifelong fan of Judy Garland, was triumphant. The ruby slippers were purchased for $178,000, a record for Hollywood memorabilia.
It was magic. There was magic in those shoes.
Following the auction, Anthony Landini was faced with a unique problem. Where do you keep a $178,000 pair of shoes? Landini decided to seek advice from the pair's original owner, Roberta Bauman.
I said, "Sir, they're your shoes." But I said, that will answer my wish that whomever bought those ruby slippers would show them continually to the little children.
Roberta's wish came true. Anthony Landini loaned the shoes to Disney's MGM Studios in Florida, and on April 29, 1989, the ruby slippers were unveiled. Resting on a spinning pedestal within a bulletproof protective case, the shoes could now be seen by millions of children every year.
Some people actually stand there and tears come to their eyes.
Meanwhile, the pair of slippers Kent Warner sold for $12,000 in 1981 resurfaced. The anonymous owner heard the news of the record-smashing auction and contacted Christie's with hopes for a similar financial windfall.
So I called up the underbidder, who was a gentleman in St. Louis, Philip Samuels, who wanted to buy them desperately, and he made an offer and we sold them.
Philip Samuels, an art dealer, purchased the shoes for the same price of $178,000.
They were deemed the witch's pair. That is to say, the pair of shoes that were close up when the house falls on the wicked.
I said, wow.
Meanwhile, 1,500 miles west in California, collector Michael Shaw discovered similar uses for the magic of his ruby slippers.
Ruby slippers have been used for fundraisers for AIDS research and AIDS awareness. I think Judy would be very pleased that the shoes were being used to help other people.
Brooks seeing green.
They took the whole thing and put it into one of my pillowcases, and they were ready to steal it.
In this new millennium.
Okay, so I saw a question come across to really quickly answer this. So interesting to like add to the scandal of all this. So to spill the tea. Okay, so yes, Michael Shaw's ruby slippers were the ones that were in the Judy Garland Museum that were stolen, that were taken back not a few years, but like 10 years ago. I don't remember. It was like some time ago. But like those slippers that were taken from that museum were Michael Shaw's. What you're going to hear him tell when this commercial's over for this weird like Eureka steam vac that if you guys saw, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I remember that thing. But anyway, he also had an attempt on his slippers to be stolen years prior. Somebody broke into his apartment and put them inside of a pillowcase. He'll tell you, oh, it's crazy. Okay, so the tea is hot. Not only did his shoes get stolen from the Judy Garland Museum successfully, like a few years back, But prior to that, there was an attempt put on them. So you're going to hear about that. And it's just nutso klutzo. Like, I mean, what? What? Yeah. So, yeah. As pretty as they are, they come with such a price tag of like such a responsibility. And it's insane. It's insane. But getting back to these weird commercials.
Nicely equipped in 23.4. So bad, it's good. How U.S. gymnast Vanessa Atler eats a Reese's peanut butter cup.
Vanessa Atler. Oh my gosh. I remember this commercial.
There's no wrong way to eat a Reese's. AOL membership gives you more benefits, and it's never been easier.
It's very easy to use. Anyone can use it.
AOL parental controls help safeguard your kids.
Customer service at AOL is fabulous.
Email, buddy list, AOL.
Oh, how crazy.
America Online. Sign up today. The exciting
Okay.
thing
I thought that was going to come back a lot sooner than that. So anyway, for those who are just joining us, my shirt, or my sweater rather, cashmere sweater, is from Coach. This came out a few years back, part of their Wizard of Oz line. So check that out if you would like one. Coach makes them. And then after the show here, we're going to take a look at some of the ruby slippers in my collection. I'll describe different replicas and things like that to you. And I will show you the Western costume ruby slippers, which are actually a part of the recreations and reenactments on tonight's show from E! Hollywood Story. So that's kind of fun. I always thought that was really neat. And then I have a bunch of like books about the ruby slippers I want to share with you, so you guys can brush up on your reading for the ruby slippers, some fiction, some nonfiction. Yeah, it'll be great. So, oh, I think we're coming back. Yes.
By 1989, the 4 authenticated pairs of ruby slippers were in good hands. The shoes, owned by the Smithsonian, art dealer Philip Samuels, and businessman Anthony Landini, were on public display, closely guarded and under protective glass. Collector Michael Shaw's pristine pair were in a handmade case in his Los Angeles living room. That was a mistake.
There are people that don't just love collecting or a hobby. They become obsessed with it. It was an enterprise of love and enjoyment. It turned into a nightmare.
On Halloween 1989, Shaw was at work at Universal Studios when he received an unsettling call from his neighbors. Shaw's apartment had been burglarized.
They had taken the ruby slippers, which are in a display case. You talk about the chutzpah, the nerve. And they took the whole thing and put it into one of my pillowcases.
Before the thieves escaped with their loot, Michael's neighbors scared them off. Shaw suspected a rival collector of orchestrating the burglary, but was unable to prove his theory to the police. The case was dropped.
I realized as much as I loved being able to look at the shoes every day, and the fact that my parents, who are both gone, had made the case for me, I realized the safest thing to do is to keep them in a bank safe, the deposit box.
All 4 pairs of the ruby slippers were now under lock and key, but collectibles were commanding outrageous sums, and memorabilia crime continued to thrive. In 1996, a Warner Brothers employee was caught stealing props from the set of Batman and Robin. In order to avoid prison, the thief fingered David Elkaby, the owner of Star World Souvenir Shop on Hollywood Boulevard, accusing Elkaby of being a large-scale fence of stolen memorabilia.
In 1971, the studios didn't care. In 1981, studios didn't care. 1991, studios didn't care. Now that they see there's a market for movie memorabilia, they're saying, wait a minute, this is money out of our pocket.
On January 7th, 1997, Elkaby was awakened by the LAPD.
They were at my doorstep one morning at 6 a.m. and they're coming with us.
The police confiscated hundreds of memorabilia items and charged Elkaby with buying and selling stolen property. Los Angeles Police Detective Fabian Ospina was the investigating officer on the case.
He had a network of people who were in the studio system. They were either laborers, prop masters, assistant prop masters, people who were in the area where the movie was in production. And he would give them a stipend if they were able to liberate a movie prop.
Elkaby claimed he was unaware that any of his inventory was stolen. and told the district attorney that Warner Brothers could not verify ownership. In 1998, after more than a year of legal wrangling, David Elkeby entered a guilty plea. The judge ordered Elkeby placed in an electronic ankle shackle and sentenced him to 1 year of house arrest.
I'm finishing up a probation and basically pretty much out of the business. Unless if I'm going to get something, I need documentation beyond documentation. I mean, just short of a letter from the president of the studio, I wouldn't buy anything today.
Along with the subterranean world of forgers, fences, and thieves, the Ruby Slippers helped create a legitimate memorabilia market. A multi-million-dollar a year business with sky's the limit prices. In October 1999, the dress that Marilyn Monroe wore while singing Happy Birthday to John F. Kennedy hit Christie's auction block and set a new record for star memorabilia.
For the last time, at $1,150,000. Hold on for you, sir.
In May 2000, for the first time in over a decade, collectors will again fiercely battle over the Ruby Slippers. Hoping to capitalize on memorabilia madness, Anthony Landini has decided to return his pair of Ruby Slippers to Christie's auction block. The Ruby Slippers have always been the ultimate treasure for memorabilia collectors. If money is the measure, then Dorothy's shoes will prove once and for all Hollywood's value for its history.
If a happy birthday Marilyn Monroe dress brings $1.3 million, it seems to me the Ruby Slippers could easily bring $5 million.
If she took the heel 3 times, anything could happen, like magic. The witch Margaret Hamilton, she was terrific. Ray Bolger, the straw man, you remember him there? He was terrific. And Jack Hughes, the Tin Man, And it's beautiful, Dorothy, and guess what? The Ruby Slippers. I got those with her. Don't hold the door.
Did it with Jerry. How cute. I miss him. For those of you who had the chance to know Jerry, like, he was just a blessing. How amazing. So, yes, Michael. Oh, Jerry. I know, right? Oh, I miss him so much. Him and Elizabeth were such blessings to have here. So let's get back into our Ruby Slippers and talk about things that make us happy and the things that we really love. That show, getting to that, let's talk about, wow. Okay, so that was a lot to take in. So the scandal. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, so the Ruby Slippers are basically a stolen item, more or less, but not really because it falls under a new jurisdiction. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? Like, and the whole thing with Michael Shaw is like she was having somebody trying to steal them prior, and in 1989, and then it actually ended up happening later in the 2000s. Like, how crazy. How crazy. Well, that was awesome. I hope you guys learned a lot from that. And if you want, stick around. We're going to go through my collection here of Ruby Slippers. I'm going to talk about each pair. I'm going to take the camera off the stand and we're going to get closer. So, oh, you guys are welcome. Thank you so much for watching with us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't want to like violate any copyright laws or anything like that. And so like I received no money by doing this. This is not an endorsed thing. You guys don't pay to see this in any way, shape, or form. So like this is something that like I did so that as if you came to my house and I put and we could watch it. And because of COVID and everything, we have. So here we go. So, oh, okay, guys, I'm going to take you off the stand. here. Okay, give me a minute. Again, this is a live show. I'm sorry. Oh, alrighty. Let's go. Okay, so here we are in my collection of Oz Ruby Slippers.